conversations like this, I think, will help our tech community, and to a certain extent might allow us to provide a little bit of leadership. If we do things well, we might be able to say, oh, well, use tech, it's good for this, we're setting a good example for everybody else. I'd like us to be setting a good example. I think we've got some work to do.
Can I mention something at the intersection of authoring tech and the commercial publishing world, which actually bears, I mean, Jonathan has contact with this because you worked for Oxford University Press, didn't you? Or something like that?
The other place, Cambridge.
I hope you'll forgive me.
One is the biggest and one is the oldest.
I'm mindful of a perhaps grievous misstep on my part here, but anyway, Cambridge. So academic presses and any number of jobs that I had in my professional career as a publishing consultant came to a point where there was a residue. Now that the book was in print and warehoused on paper, there was a residue as a TeX file which could have a life beyond today. And in some cases, that TeX file was given back to the author, and we prided ourselves on giving it, how to say this, in the form of a descriptively marked up document with as little as possible of procedural markup in it, notwithstanding that it was the printed product was produced directly with TeX, LaTeX in many cases.
Wait, so you modified the author's TeX file, or what did you do?
Well, in the production process of book publishing, even if the author uses TeX to produce the manuscript, the printed product is not necessarily printed directly from something like TeX. Sometimes it's re-typeset using a professional typesetting system, which means it enters a black hole of information, as it were. But in other cases, and this is where I was a market participant, we produced the camera-ready copy directly from TeX.
Mm-hmm.
And I built a business based on that, a small business, mind you. But that meant that because we were a disciple of Leslie Lamport, we always had this very, very high value TeX markup document that could be used for subsequent editions and so on. And, you know, it doesn't go without saying in the world of TeX, but there it is. And I'm happy to say that in some cases we got word years down the line that a second edition was being produced or a second printing was being produced, and could we fix the following problems and so on. So this was good, but it was by no means commonplace. And Jana referred to earlier about people embarking on a development project and with a particular consciousness in mind, and hopefully they do it before it was too late, you see. But we've been looking in the publishing world at a backlog of essentially lost opportunity. And as far as the market is concerned, it's unimportant that we lost these opportunities, because once the thing is on paper and in warehouses, the market doesn't really care any further. In fact, some of these books were loss leaders, particularly the ones that I was asked to produce. The publisher knew it would never make any money on them, but it could add it to its list, its book list, and add luster to their escutcheon. So you see in what a marginalized market I was working in. So that was the reality. But this is a problem of great longstanding, because the Library of Congress has any number of titles that really need to be preserved archivally, because in their current state, they're not on archival grade material, so the paper is falling apart. Archivists understand this issue well. And then even in the computer typesetting era, which by the way predated the arrival of tech by at least a decade, they were using computers to produce books. Sometimes these documents that exist are on media that no longer have hardware that can read them. And these media exist and are slowly degrading themselves, like acetate media. It was replaced with polyester at a certain point, and things got better, but acetate is nothing like as stable as it needs to be. So these problems have been mounting over time, but my thought has always been that all we have to do is start today and do things right, and we'll stop contributing to the backlog. And that's a path of wisdom that the market does not support. But I still have all of the jobs I ever did, because Moore's law means that as many as there were, the cost of storing the digital media is vanishingly small. This is yet another place where marginal costs have gone down because of Moore's law. So unfortunately, in the places that did the most work, large composition houses, they didn't necessarily do that. They would set the media aside, but they wouldn't necessarily preserve them. And at some point, they would just throw them out, and that's really sad.
There's
and
a
that's
time
what,
when
yeah,
there was a time when you compiled your program and then you deleted the source code to save disk space. A long
I
time
remember
ago.
RK05 drives. You could put as much on one of those. It was a rack-mounted drive, and a single disk held as much data as a Sony micro floppy 3.5-inch, 2.5 megabytes. For the single density micro floppy. So that's Moore's law in action. And how many people have those Sony micro floppy diskettes in boxes and boxes in a drawer somewhere? But then when you look at how much space that's taking, in terms of megabytes and how much that costs, why aren't these files online in a Google Drive today? But well, yeah, absolutely, Philip. There was a premium. We couldn't afford to keep all that data online because we were at that cusp of Moore's law, and high energy physics experiments are a classical example. You probably know what that scene looks like yourself. But CERN, produces so much data. at the superconducting super collider.
Yeah, but they have a real-time system which discards most of it before it even gets recorded.
Yeah, well, you know, in the US we have the NSA doing likewise. So and then we have Amazon Web Services, AWS, right?
Yeah.
So this is the nature of the thing is that there's kind of no excuse for throwing away digital data or leaving it in a legacy format that can no longer be read. And I've encountered many of them, you know, in my time. So that 1991 book that was digitally composed, but, you know, is on archive.org as a facsimile, that does point to a problem, but I think it was a market problem. And we were not in a position to address those market problems, and the author wasn't either. So the best we could do is to simply say to the author, by the way, here's the text source, you might want to save this, because the publisher was not interested in paying at all, not interested at all.
So did you have authors who submitted in something other than tech, and you wrote the tech file yourself?
I never, well, with few exceptions, I never saw those jobs, because backcoding something that was, say, in a word processor format and putting it in the form of TAC, that's economically impracticable. Publishers did not want to pay for that. I learned the hard way.
So what you're referring to are sort of modified tech files, or someone's unmuted.
Yeah, Jonathan, could you mute yourself? That might improve things. He's done it. Okay, so Philip, you were saying?
Yeah, so when you say you gave the author back the properly constructed tech file, that's a modified version of what he submitted in tech.
Absolutely, because, you know, authors don't necessarily cleave to descriptive markup paradigms.
So
and
you
in
put
some
all the
cases,
subscription
we also
braces.
gave them a macro package
Yeah.
that would essentially allow the author to typeset the job per specification on the author's own computer. And we thought at the time that we were giving away the candy store, because that meant that we wouldn't necessarily get the job the next time around.
Mm.
But in the end, that's the only way we could support essentially the archiving of the information. And to this day, I mean, the complexion continues to change, because you know about RevTech and the fact that any number of journals in the American Physical Society and American Institute of Physics, they use the RevTech LaTeX document class for their authors to submit jobs. So luckily those tech files, those LaTeX documents go into archive.org with the other spelling, you know what?
If the author puts them there, yeah.
Well, but they can go there, and it's not uncommon, or so I've heard from the American Physical Society. I'm sorry, yeah, the American Physical Society. So because the authors want to share the preprints, it's the easy way. Yeah. That's what I've heard.
No, in some fields, almost everything is there, but it would be a mistake to rely on that for long-term archiving, is what I mean.
Yeah, it's really a publishing medium and not an archiving medium.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, some people put the final version there or something equivalent. Some people put the submitted manuscript, don't bother updating it. Sometimes you don't even know which version you have unless you can compare it to the official version, in which case you don't even need the archive version because you've got an official version. Yeah, so
Well,
there's a lot of stuff there, but it's not really clear, you know, in all cases what version it is and so on. Yeah.
well, just one thing before you speak, Jonathan, if you don't mind. I've mentioned on this tech hour before that the author's submission is handed off to a commercial typesetter. That means the paper version was not done with tech.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the official version, it's that thing that's the official version, and that's not available on archive.org, and it's not tech.
Right, but you can still have a document which is, as far as the contents goes, is equivalent to the final version.
Not really, because you know, and I'm mindful that Jonathan had his hand up, so I don't want to get into a
No, I mean something
lengthy
completely
discussion.
different. I mean, is it the version before or after the changes made as suggested by the referee, for example? Is it a preprint or a postprint, if you like?
And that is a part of the process that I don't have much contact with.
Yeah. Yeah, you see stuff after it's been accepted.
Actually, I don't. I write the macros.
Okay.
I wrote RevTech,
Yeah.
and that's my presence in the project. But I also hear stories from the people at the American Physical Society and authors like you. So, Jonathan.
Yeah, a view I earlier in an earlier tech hour was that the destruction of the loss of archiving, the loss of knowledge, that sort of thing, is the cause. All boils down to social disruption. That social disruption in one form or another is the cause. It couldn't be somebody dying is a social disruption of sorts. It can be the destruction of societies. It can be deliberate. The Inca civilization was deliberately damaged. And and many other forms of social disruption, including software becoming obsolete and so forth. So for the tech community, I think it's got a special responsibility to protect and encourage and promote the archival nature of tech. And that at least gives people an opportunity to say, well, I want my documents to be archival. I will use tech. That's one of the great selling points I think we have. I'll stop.
Well, I'm taking the time, Jonathan, to think about the world of technical publishing that includes tech and the world that excludes tech. And I have a number of books here on finance that are typeset with some other thing, and whose depiction of math typography is absolutely execrable. it gets worse than the page I opened to. Much worse. This is done with a word processor. So my sense is that in the book publishing market, there are stakeholders, the authors, the publishers, and the readers, and then there are all sorts of service providers kind of at a lower level. And in that world, the value that's attached to the residual value of the document, it's nothing like as large as we would like it to be. I guess that's what I'm saying. And it disappoints me, but the market is much more powerful. In fact, you were talking about, Jonathan, social disruption. And I think that that's how the market shows up, as socially disruptive. We can't forget that it's kind of like a behemoth with no morals. And social order, valuing old things and so on, history, that's a sort of a different thing. It's a different aspect of civilization.